Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mountain Lake Journal. I'm Tom Helling. The City of Montreal is beginning the celebration of its 375th birthday, and we are marking the occasion by broadcasting a 5-part documentary on the history of Canada's first great metropolis. Filmmaker Paul Carvalho's first segment, which will be broadcast this Sunday evening here on Mountain Lake PBS, tells the story of the founding of Montreal on the banks of the St. Lawrence River in 1642 and how it grew into one of the world's great port cities.
The St. Lawrence River is the great transit and arrival route tracing the path of Montreal's history. Here, between the St. Lawrence and the St. Pierre stream, which has now disappeared, researchers dig out objects revealing the presence of Native Americans. They were here before, during, and after the arrival of French settlers.
Archéologiquement, nous trouvons beaucoup de traces de ces deux cultures qui vivaient ensemble et qui se côtoyaient.
There was a stable here, then a garage, so the soil was never disturbed. It's the oldest archaeological site on the island.
Nous avons quelques objets qui viennent de leur quotidien.
They find European glass beads that natives sewed on their clothing or attached to their hair. Ceramic fragments from faraway tribes. Bullets from European guns sold to the natives, and a native pipe. They also find this Dutch pipe, used perhaps by the very first French settlers.
Dans les années 1850-60, Montréal, c'est un peu l'interface entre l'Angleterre et sa colonie. Et l'Angleterre nous envoie ses produits manufacturés qui vont passer par le port de Montréal avant d'être redistribués dans le reste du Canada.
All through the 19th century and until World War I, almost 4 million immigrants entered Canada through the port of Quebec. Most of them head to Montreal, which is quickly becoming the metropolis of Canada. The majority are Anglo-Saxon, Irish, English, and Scottish. John Molson, soon to become a famous beer manufacturer, arrives alone but full of ambition.
Il n'a que 19 ans, une centaine de livres en poche, lorsqu'il achète un petit fonds de commerce, une brasserie qui n'a jamais produit un seul litre de bière, à l'endroit même où elle se trouve toujours aujourd'hui, Notre-Dame, sur le port de Montréal.
The Lachine Canal is the site of Canada's first industrial revolution. Before electricity, water propels turbines, pulls belts, and turns wheels in factories by the canal. The workers are French Canadians and immigrants from the British Isles, often from Ireland. The first wave of Irishmen provides the muscle power that builds the canal. In 1860, the St. Lawrence River is witness to a feat of engineering that will change the lives of Montrealers. At the time, this is the longest bridge in the world.
On l'a construit pour permettre au chemin de fer de franchir le Saint-Laurent. Il fallait un pont à Montréal pour aller rejoindre la côte américaine à Portland.
Once it's linked to Portland, Montreal can export its products in great quantities throughout the year. Montreal's port expands at full speed due to growing exports of wheat coming from the Canadian West.
À la fin des années 20, Montréal était le grand port d'exportation des céréales, le plus grand en Amérique du Nord.
Technological change will cause the river to lose its human face. The St. Lawrence Seaway, a deep canal within the river, allows big ships to bypass Montreal.
Les grands silos qu'on avait construits au début du 20e siècle deviennent inutiles. On en démolit 2 dans le vieux port. Il y a le silo numéro 5 qui reste là, mais qui est vide, qui est inutilisé. C'est comme un vestige industriel.
And the filmmaker Paul Carvalho joins us now. Welcome, nice to see you.
Thank you, same here.
Montreal is getting ready to celebrate its 375th birthday coming up next year.
That's
and
right.
you have created this series of documentaries, 5-hour-long films that really look into the city's culture and history. How did you decide to produce these films?
We went with this idea to Radio-Canada, and they said, we love it, and you know, the 375th anniversary of the founding of the city is coming up. Why don't you make a film for every major area of the city? Make 5. And I said, well, why not? It is the only time in my life that a station has pitched me on films to make rather than the other way around. But it was very intimidating.
I was going to say that must be daunting to be presented with, we want you to do a project looking at the 375-year history of this incredible metropolis.
Exactly. No, it was scary. We spent the first year just looking at the history of the city, reading, contacting the historians, asking them what would be the main points we would have, trying to break it all down into 5 big documentaries.
You worked for many years for the CBC, both in television and radio, and you would do documentaries, but then looking at the films, that they're documentaries, but really they look like feature films. They're shot beautifully, they have a wonderful soundtrack, and so they look like movies that are telling the story of Montreal.
I treated each one of the films as a work of art. I agonized over every photo, over every, I can't say I agonized over every shot, but certainly every little story within these documentaries, because that's what you have. It's a succession of stories, each lasting 3, 4, 5 minutes. Each of the stories had to be perfect in itself. It had to say all it had to say about a specific aspect of the history of the city, and it had to evoke emotion, not just convey information. So you have the historical characters who passed away centuries ago, and you're trying to make them live with whatever, a signature, a piece of paper, an order, a drawing of this person, a statue. And then you have today's characters. You would have a historian who's very emotionally involved with this material. He's been living with this material for a long time. And we found, for instance, an archivist who looks after all these papers and who says in this first film that it's a tremendous honor for him to be the custodian of all this work, of these papers that are 370 years old. So he can talk about it with great emotion, and that helps us because you need to communicate this feeling of reverence for a city that is so old.
You had a trove of material, thousands of photographs and paintings and maps,
Yes.
Just an incredible wealth.
Yeah, that's correct. Each one of the documentaries had about 200 photos, maps, illustrations. So I have today in my hard drives 1,000 photos and illustrations in high resolution, all cleaned and digitized. I'm putting together a book, a coffee table book on all of this.
Oh, we'll look forward to that. And of course, in the first film, you profile a famous photographer from Montreal, William Notman. His style of photography just created amazing works.
It's incredible, you know, that his work has been preserved. He and his sons. He came to Montreal when photography was just beginning in 1860, and his work has been preserved. And the most daunting thing is to be inside the McCord Museum and see all these shelves in which the negatives are preserved. These are glass negatives. So each is very heavy and big, like an 8x10. So these would be printed in their real size. They wouldn't be blown up. It was fantastic to have that sense of connection with history.
So going back to the origins of Montreal, 1642, was it the St. Lawrence River that attracted them to that site? Was it the fact that they hit the Lachine Rapids and had trouble navigating the river? What was it that put them at that site and where they decided to build Fort Ville-Marie?
Montreal is a very strategically placed island because from Montreal you can take various rivers to go inland and to come all the way to the Great Lakes and keep on going to Louisiana. So whoever controlled Montreal would actually have a chance of controlling North America. And for a while it looked like it was New France. It was France that was going to have all this land. And we have this fantastic map you may see in the
showing
first
where
film.
the explorers and navigators would go from.
There is this New France written across the heart of North America. It's incredible. So this was a coveted island, but there was a question of the Iroquois, who were very, you would say, nationalistic. This was their land. What are these Europeans doing here? And the Europeans did not come into the island of Montreal to conquer. They came to spread the word of God. This was a mission to spread the gospel, really. So this was a utopian community of believers who came to teach the word of God to the natives.
They persevered, and Montreal became one of the great port cities of the world.
There were three great cities. There was Boston, there was New York, and there was Montreal. And Montreal was where Canada was invented. And it was essentially this idea that we have so much trade going on with the United States. Everything here is going to be north-south. If we want to have a separate country that is controlled by the British Crown, we have to make something happen from east to west. And that was the Trans-Canadian Railroad. And they created this railroad where they went from Montreal all the way across the Rockies to Vancouver. So Canada was invented in Montreal.
And that opened them to trade, not only trade to the west, but especially to Europe.
All the grain was coming out of the west, and of course Montreal was then, of course, the great port where the grain was packed into the ships, which was no easy thing at a time with no containers and so on. It was all done manually, and then it would go across the ocean to the British Isles, and the ships would be coming back with manufactured goods because it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So Montreal was everything for a while.
As we get into the 20th century, in the 70s, the market sending the wheat to Britain ended.
This was really an incredible blow to the Port of Montreal, and the economy of the entire city really depended on the port. So the city took a huge hit when this happened in the 1960s. And then in the 70s came the first wave of globalization. Montreal had many factories in the east end part of the city, in Hochelaga, Maisonneuve, and these factories started to weaken and to close one after the other. So there was this huge working class with nothing to do. Suddenly Montreal looked like a city of no future. It took a few decades for Montreal to begin to reinvent itself.
And that's the question you raised in the first film, is will it rise again? And I think over the past couple of decades we've seen
yes.
that. Paul Carvalho, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You can watch the world premiere of The River and Its Island this Sunday, December 4th at 6 p.m. here on Mountain Lake PBS. Filmmaker Paul Carvalho will be our guest in the studio. And we will be broadcasting his other 4 films on the history of Montreal in the coming months.